He got hit with so many typicallys and uniques.
Well, that's unique. We don't really see that very much.
Yeah, typical or unique. Aiden was unique today, or there was
Right.
something typical today.
Oh, yes, that is very typical. We see it all the time.
Oh, don't worry about it. That's typical.
Oh, every child is unique, so we can't say what is typical.
That's typical. See you later.
We call it the typical unique conversation. Welcome back to Typically Unique. I'm Kim Aponte, and I'm here with my husband, Carlos.
Hello. And we're going to go a little off script for the first time today.
Special episode.
So we finished all the AML, Bruton stuff with Aiden. And we're going to be maybe doing some other things in the future. But today is September 9th, a couple days prior to the anniversary of September 11th, year 22. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that. We wanted to spend some time talking about our memories of September 11th and talk about what we feel like today. So
yeah, I feel like every year at this time, you just start thinking about it again. I mean, I know it always comes back up on the news and everything, but for our generation, our age, we were young parents at the time. It had a huge effect on us. And, so in 2001, we were just reflecting back on our age and what was going on in our lives at that time. And, we had been married for about 4 years. We had been in our house for about probably a year, I would guess.
Pretty close, yeah.
Our kids were 3 and 2. And, we were just, young in our careers and, living life and raising our little kids. And we had, even that summer, in July, took a trip with my best friend and her husband, and we had went to Mexico. What was the city in Mexico? Like
Puerto something.
Yeah, Puerto Vallarta, I think is where we went, And so, of course, you fly there, and then when September 11th happens, you're like, whoa, like I felt like we had just gotten back, from that trip, and, safe to say that was the last flight trip we took for a while.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And, just reflecting back on that a little bit, Kim's not a flyer to begin with. She does not like
I will, because I want to get where I'm going.
Yeah, she, if pressed, if she wants to go someplace, we'll get on a plane. But it's not her favorite mode of transportation. No. I think it's fair to say.
No,
and but back then in 2001, it was pretty laxed. I mean, we were going in and out of terminals, and very little, some security, but not as much as we have today. So. I think the big thing from that, though, was when this event happened, we kind of looked back and was like, oh my gosh, what if we would have flown this trip? Because a lot of people were stuck and, a lot of things that we'll probably talk about. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun trip. Glad we did it.
Did we even need a passport at that time to get into Mexico? I don't think so. I don't remember, but I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't think with Canada and Mexico you had to at that time.
Right, yeah,
so things have really changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was teaching at a school that I'm not at anymore. It was a few minutes from my house, neighborhood school, teaching 5th grade. And had a great group of colleagues that I worked with at the time. So I remember being there, and you were working at a company.
I'm working at a manufacturing company, and I'll start because your story's twice as crazy as mine. But I was working at a manufacturing company, and a colleague of mine had come in and said, I guess I should set it up better, that he was a volunteer fireman. So back then they had pagers, and he got an emergency page that said, a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And he had come into my office. He was working on the manufacturing floor, and my office was right next to it. And we were good friends. He came in, and he's like, Carlos, man, this plane hit the, World Trade Center. And I think both of us immediately thought, just a small little plane, hit it. We didn't think anything of it. And I remember him and I talking, and I said, well, look, if you hear anything else, let me know. And so we bantered for about 5 minutes. He was just about to walk out of my office and his pager went off again. And he said, and he looked at it, and this guy who was, big guy like me, went completely white. And I was like, what happened? And he's like, another plane just hit the other World Trade Center and they think we're under attack. And that's all he said. And I think he ran out to go tell other people or to call somebody at home. But that's immediately how I found out and what happened. So I'm sitting there in my office like, what do I do? What do I do? That was my thought. But you were in front of a group of kids.
Well, and it's funny when, not funny, it is, I'm just thinking that's the way we all heard it, right? It was just, you hear about the first plane, and then when you hear the second plane, that's when everybody knows. And, those same words were used to tell me, I'm sure we can all relate, something similar are the words that were spoken to us when we found out, right? So yeah, I'm at this school, and it was an old school, and doesn't even exist anymore. They tore all our old buildings down. It had a weird layout so that it had like a more modern addition that was added to it, and that's where like the office was and all the lower grades, kindergarten, first, second grades. I taught fifth grade. So I was in the old section of the building that was more, the other building was like, one floor. I was in a 2-level building, and I was on this upstairs level with 5 other colleagues, and we were like super close. We were like in our own little world up there, and I'm in my classroom for the morning. I believe at that time I kept my students all day, and I'm just teaching, going about it. And one of my colleagues, who was a teacher who didn't have a classroom, but she was support staff who would go into the classrooms and help with reading or math, knocked on the door, and normally we just pop in each other's rooms and, whatever, come hang out, come help teach or whatever. And she's like, I had to come out into the hallway, and that freaked me out right there. I'm like, what's going on? And she was kind of like, I don't even know how to say this, but a plane, I think she told me at that point that planes had flown into buildings in New York City in the World Trade Center and were under attack. And I think the teachers in the building who knew about the first one didn't want to freak anybody out until, like we said, as soon as you see that second plane, everybody knew. And so then they're like, oh my gosh, we have to tell everybody. So I appreciated her telling me, but I was just standing there like, what? Because I was just in the middle of a lesson. And I stood there for a brief moment. I'm like, oh my God, I got to turn around and go back in there and face these kids. And so, my colleagues that had a little bit more freedom, they had access to the news, and so they would come and give me updates a little bit. But I turned right around and put a smile on my face and went back to our lesson that we were doing, because I didn't feel like I wanted to be the one to tell other people's children what was going on. I mean, I would have done it in the softest way possible, but I didn't want to tell them. But then I caught wind that some other teachers were actually watching the news with classes, and then I thought, oh my goodness, my students are going to go outside and be with those kids or be with them at lunch. So I did have to tell them like just a little bit that, something's going on, we're safe. Just kind of left it at that. And then when we did get to go to lunch, I finally got to go to a classroom, and all the teachers who had lunch at that time kind of gathered, and we watched the news. And then we were supposed to have conferences that night. Mm-hmm. And the principal was kind of like going around to different groups of teachers as he saw them, and was kind of getting our, what do you want to do? Should we? Because at this point, parents were coming to the school and getting their kids and taking them home. And, I kind of felt that way too. Like I wanted to be somewhere where I could just know what was going on moment by moment. And he's like, oh, so do you guys still want to have conferences tonight? And we're all like, no. And how many people do you think are going to come for conferences,
Right.
So, yeah, they ended up canceling. And I just couldn't wait to get home to
But you had spent the whole day at school, right?
Yeah,
All the way up until
finished the
dismissal.
day. Mm-hmm.
Unlike me, I think after I heard about the second plane, I started trying to ferret out what the heck was going on. And I did hear that there was another plane that had hit the Pentagon or something. So at that point, I left work. I checked out and went to go pick up our kids and take them home. I wasn't sure what they were going to do with the schools and everything. Like, I didn't know what under attack meant.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get our kids and then figure out what was going to go on with Kim later. If she was going to come home, I at least picked up the kids, but I had a little bit of leniency because there was nobody reporting to me at the time, where you had 20 some students who were like probably wide eyed and like, what the heck's going on?
Like, I don't remember necessarily talking to you. Like, I don't remember the conversation, but I know we spoke because I was so comforted by the fact that you had just took it upon yourself and went and got the kids and went home, because I just, you just get that feeling like you want to be with your dearest loved ones. Mm-hmm. That was my only focus, like get home, because if anything was going to happen, where do you want to be? I wanted to be with you and the kids at home.
So I got the kids. We were at the house, or I think, we were at the house at the time?
Yeah, we were here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were here. Okay, so we're at the house. I was waiting for Kim to come home. Wasn't sure exactly what time that would be, but got the kids kind of doing some stuff, and I was in front of the TV just trying to get all the information I could, because I knew when Kim came home, she would want to watch, and we would want to get caught up on what's going on and everything like that. So about that time when you come home, every news station was covering this, of course, and we just started watching the TV replays and everything that was going on. And just, I think in the moment, I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy real. And I remember telling Kim, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember telling Kim, I was like, the president better get back to the White House and stand in front of that door and say, come and get me, because
he kept saying that.
Everybody's got to be terrified right now.
And because we had to wait a long time for him to do that. Like, he spoke early when he was at that school, at that elementary school.
Yeah,
he gave a statement, and then he was up on Air Force One flying around, and you were like, everybody was speculating, is he going to a bunker, or what is he going to do? And you're like, he better not. He better go right back to that White House and stand on those steps.
Because I was a little bit in fear, not of, our little city being attacked, but what that meant for everybody, and the sense of security and safety and innocence, all that changed in that moment. And we're looking at two little kids like, you're living in a different world from 24 hours ago. Right now, you're living in a different world. And it's funny how much things have changed since then because of that. Yep. But I remember literally thinking that, like, they're living in a different world from 24 hours ago. Yeah.
And, I'm sure by the time I got home, all the planes had been grounded, and, the 4 planes had crashed. But I do remember knowing that there was when that 4th plane was still out there for a while. Remember, there was a period of time where they were trying to get all the planes grounded, and they knew there was one that they couldn't get in contact with, and that one was in our area. Yeah. And the eerie, creepy feeling that I had knowing it flew right over us. Like, ugh, that was horrible.
Yeah. And, even when that last plane finally crashed, it was the not knowing and where was that one heading, and and I'm still at that time like, hey, you stand in front of the White House, and it could have been heading that way. I think that
right.
the timing's a little different, but I just remember those were some pretty vivid thoughts. Another vivid thought that I had that moment, right when Kim first came home, and we're debriefing, how was your day? How did you find out? We did all that. I turned your attention to a VHS tape that I've had for decades. And this VHS tape was Orson Welles' Nostradamus. And we had watched that a couple times prior to 9/11.
Yeah, we like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it predicted the attacks on the Twin Towers. And I remember her and I saying, at the time, like, hey, there's some stuff in here that's true, but boy, I can't see how that could happen. And seeing how someone was able to attack New York City, in our borders, doing it that way was, wow, how could Nostradamus have predicted that,
Yeah.
Which lends some credence to so we got I think the next day we got the videotape out
see it again.
and watched it again.
Yeah, what exactly did he say, and how does that line up? And just crazy. And
a couple other things. So the Nostradamus thing was kind of a funny thing, but I think as we were watching how people were covered with soot, and people were trying to get off the island and trying to get rescued.
It was heart-wrenching watching that. Just, you felt so bad.
Yeah. And the boats were like picking up folks.
Yeah. So I was, remembering every year I will watch all the documentaries, like the one that, and I watch them, it's hard to talk about because it's a tragic event that happened. But to see it in, as a documentary, and watching what had happened, and you just feel those emotions for those people, how scary it was, and your heart goes out for them. But my favorite ones are the boat rescue, like just watching humanity come together in a time of need, that I think is the heartwarming part of it. That I like to see when I watch those documentaries, and just all those boats. So it was like the boat army just coming to get people, because people were stranded on that island. And so that was amazing. And how coincidental that one fire department had a videographer, a documentary, what do you call him? A documentarian, with them at the moment that this happened. And I believe, wasn't he standing outside? Like, he was outside, and I think he caught it on
the first plane
camera, the first camera. Yeah. And he was outside for like some gas leak or something they thought was going on. And just, we always talk about the universe and, putting people in the right places, but he just had an incredible viewpoint to witness everything that had happened. And so that's incredible footage if you've never seen that.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I remember asking you later that night, I'm like, do you feel like going back to work? How do you feel? And what do you remember about how you felt that night?
I do remember feeling scared for a while. At first it was the not knowing, because it just felt like you never knew when it was going to be over. Because it was like, what's next? Because more things kept happening. So then when it seemed like, okay, there weren't any more immediate attacks. Well, gosh, are we at war now? Because we didn't know who had done it, and if it was, was it a country that we're going to go to war with? Right. That was scary. It was nerve-wracking.
Plus, during that time, again, remember, Kim's a school teacher. Either the next day, or the day after, we started hearing things like they're going to be, they're hearing chatter about shootings at the mall and people going to school and shooting children. I mean, And then
Yep.
a few months later, or maybe a month later, there was that whole anthrax scare. So, I mean, there was a lot of stuff being said during that time to, really, I mean, it was almost shelter in place.
Yeah, they were monitoring threats,
Yes,
right? And
right.
like it was before those official threat levels came out. That's what came out of this.
Yeah.
One
Homeland
of
Security.
those things, but they weren't sure, so they were just, they had pretty much, they locked down the travel aspect and all of that. So then they're like, well, where's our next weakest area? Well, it's going to be big public, places.
Right.
So where our most vulnerable people are. So yeah, that was nerve wracking for a while, and then it got weird because when they grounded all the flights, I remember, and I don't know if you pointed it out to me because I can be oblivious to things sometimes, just go about my day, but you're like, look at the sky. Like there were no trails, no streaks, right?
Yep.
Just clear blue skies, and it was just weird. And I'll still, because that hit me, I check the sky and just, everything's normal.
Yeah. And it's, I guess, and I agree. I mean, that was one thing that, we could look up in our backyard and, we're kind of on our airport's 50 miles away. So it's a path that they come in. So we see those all the time. And there was nothing.
Nothing was weird.
Nothing.
For weeks, it seemed like it was a long
weeks,
time.
Yeah. But it was, and at this point in my career, I did a little bit of travel, some airplane travel, but not a lot. I kind of got into sales a couple years after and then started traveling a lot. But, I did a little bit, would visit some customers, on a different aspect of my job. But, I remember people telling a little bit of 9/11 stories about how people were actually stranded places. I mean, they were literally stranding people in different countries. I mean, they just landed where they were. I mean, it was neither where they took off or where their destination was. You just landed immediately. And these people were trying to find ways to get home, So that was kind of weird for a week as well. The one last thing I'll say about the president at this time, I know we didn't talk about this, but I just thought about it. Mm-hmm. I think the day or two after when he went down to
the flag.
And he actually got on the bullhorn, and said, hey, we're going to find out who did this and they're going to hear from us, or however that was. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but, whatever he said, I thought that was another.
It was a
good
very
thing.
inspirational speech. Yeah.
And for me, I wasn't a big George Bush fan prior to that,
Me either.
Not getting into politics, but, I wasn't a huge fan prior to that. But after that, I gained a lot of respect for how he handled this situation because it could have went either way. Mm-hmm. And I think he really did a good job in bringing a lot of people together and starting to feel a little secure. I didn't like the war aspect, but I knew it was inevitable. But, I knew that he had it. Yep. He had it under control.
Yep.
So with all that, again, that's 22 years later. That's our little story about how that happened. But I guess now that you look back on it, how do you feel kind of 22 years later, and what is different because of that? And, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm so thankful you were not traveling back at that time. Like now that I have lived as a wife of a businessman who travels like that, looking at it through that perspective from those poor women who got those phone calls from their husbands that day, and I've been all over this footage. I think I've listened to all the 911 calls. It's just an interest of mine. So that's one thing. So I'm thankful for that. And, that's gives me caution today, today. That's why I try to, I like traveling with you whenever I can, because we don't like to be separated.
Yep.
And, just this was, for me, like, I feel like every generation or different people have that, like, pivotal moment in history that where you were when type moment. I wasn't alive for JFK. I wasn't in a classroom that was watching the space shuttle when that whole thing happened. This was the most poignant, moment that had a huge impact on me, just being where I was and the responsibility of the kids that I was with, because, when those kids came in the next day, that was a big topic to handle too. So.
Well, and you mentioned the shuttle and the JFK and all that. I do remember where I was when the shuttle exploded. I was actually playing college basketball at the time, and we heard it on a radio in our van going from the hotel to a game. And I didn't know how to feel about that. I was like, should we be playing this game? And I remember some of my teammates were like, I don't know if we should play, and and they're like, no, we should, and we ended up playing the game. But I remember there was a long moment of silence before our game. Like extremely long. So I remember that one because it kind of was at an impasse in a couple things in my life at the time. This I clearly remember for many reasons where I was, of course, because we were a young family at the time. And I had 2 kids. We had 2 kids that I had that sense of fear, like I got to go get them. Like it was, I'm sure they were safe, but I had to go get them. And I had to make sure Kim was safe too, and that was just a crazy feeling, something that really was just percolating in me at the time.
And you don't want that moment for them because they don't remember it at all. They were 3 and 2 and they hear us talk about it all the time. And I think we've watched some documentaries with them and, it blows their mind that happened, but it just doesn't impact them the same way because it didn't really affect them directly at that time. But
they weren't old enough to remember.
The pandemic, is probably the biggest thing for them so far.
Right. And, I think for you as a teacher, if you talk about, seminal moments, things that you remember, things that stick with you. I know you've made a lot of reference to Columbine, that because you are a teacher and that was like the first really big.
Yeah. I said, those are the 2 moments, historical moments, that impacted me in my lifetime.
Yeah. So
that, I remember where I was those 2 days. The other thing is just, I already spoke about how the first responders and humanity and, just people dropping everything. I was listening to a news broadcast earlier today and just how every medical person in New York City, no matter who they were, where they were, just drop everything, report to where you're at. They didn't have to get told to do that.
Right.
They just did it. I'm sure the same with the fire department, those people on the boats, that's that, good humanitarian effort that, is heartwarming to me. And there was a book I actually read a few years. I don't know when they published it exactly, but it was called Love, Greg, and Lauren. And it was the wife, Lauren, was actually outside of the World Trade Center, but she did work there. And she was there for the first bombing in '93, made it out of that. And she was outside of the towers and got hit by a wheel of the plane or something on fire, a part of the plane knocked into her, and she was on fire and had to run to put herself out. And so she was in the hospital for probably a year or more. And I can't even, reading that book was just because it was her husband's emails that they basically had published, and just him informing family of her condition every step of the way. But at the very end, the last one was from her. So it was just such a motivational story of, overcoming something like that. And survival. Yeah. So
I think one of the big things that hit me in the moment, and still to this day, we kind of talk about it. I think the most impactful thing that I saw on that day was the the unknown and the hurt of all the people who posted those missing family member, signs on like posts.
They were everywhere.
Everywhere. And it was like you couldn't see a camera shot in New York without just miles and miles, it seemed, of these missing person posters everywhere. And some of them handwritten, some of them, done professionally, but just the handwritten ones, I mean, it just tore me up,
That will always be burned in my memory. And then just the dazed and confused and lost look of the people who made it out of when the towers fell. Yeah. And just them, how they were covered in soot and just horrible. What just happened to me. Those are the two things that probably.
And, looking back some 22 years now, I travel a lot, right? So I'm constantly on the road. And the amount of security that we have to do is, warranted. I'd rather go on a plane feeling safe than, so if I have to get to the airport an hour early, I'm all for it, right? And things really started tightening up, before, you could bring a tube of toothpaste. Now it has to be this big. You would keep your shoes on. You have to take your shoes off because the shoe bomber, and all these things that changed, because of 9/11, which I think is perfectly fine. I'm okay with it. I think it was inconvenient at first because we didn't know how to act and react immediately, right? You just went to the airport 15 minutes before, you ran through, did the O.J. Simpson thing, and you got on the plane.
And people could go in and see you off. And now you got to have a ticket to get past.
Just to get past security. Yeah. So, I mean, all that, kind of changed. I do have one funny little story that a colleague of mine told me who was actually grounded on 9/11. So this is not my story, but a colleague of mine was supposed to fly out and actually had just boarded a plane in Cleveland, and they had to deplane. They didn't know why, but they had to deplane, and then everybody was told to go home. That all planes were being grounded, and they had to go home.
Wow.
And so they were absolutely ecstatic that they weren't, flying somewhere, got grounded, and tried to find a way to come back home. So didn't actually take off. It was many months because, air travel started again within a couple weeks, but it was many months before I think a lot of business people were like, all right, I got to get back on a plane. Willing to get back out there. So I remember this colleague of mine telling me that was leaving out of Cleveland a few months later and was going on a trip. And it was actually early in the morning, so it might have still been kind of dark out, so all the shades were down and everything. The plane takes off and there's a boom. Everybody on the plane starts freaking out, and people are like, we're going to die and there's a terrorist and, and
it was like that for a while.
Oh yeah. And all those feelings, I would have probably been running up and down the aisles with my hair on fire too, Well, somebody on the plane sitting a couple rows up from my colleague opened up the window. The window shade. And saw that the engine was like cherry red, like not on fire, but you knew something happened to the engine. And he turns around and says, everybody shut up. It's not a bomb. It's not a terrorist. Our engine's on fire.
And people were relieved.
and that's the less of three evils, right? Hey, our engine's on fire.
It's just the engine on fire.
Yeah. So they end up turning around and coming back, landed safely. And he's like, I couldn't fly for a year after that.
Oh, that's crazy.
I just, because the whole 9/11 thing, I took everything in my power to get on a plane again. And then I get on a plane and that happens and thinking it was hijacked or thinking it was a bomb, and still just
terrifying.
So he was, I just thought it was a relatable story to this because I still tell that story occasionally, around.
Well, it does show there was apprehension about so many things, because of that. And that's the terror that invokes,
And I think for us, this podcast is our memoir,
yes,
right? So we wanted to share, some of our thoughts. We would love to hear, what are your thoughts? What are maybe some of your memories?
Yeah, where were you on
Where were you?
9/11?
Exactly. During this time. And this will probably post on 9/11. So we're doing this a couple
That's
days
the goal.
early.
Yeah, we're trying to get it out for that. And to our kids, when they see this, when you were 2 and 3 with us back at that time, we were shielding you from it. So I didn't want them. I just remember right now not wanting them to, see us upset or scared or anything like that. So,
But when they went to bed,
yeah,
we were scared.
we got them tucked away and
Yep.
and then continued watching. But yeah, so this has been, our special memoir on a memorable day, in the United States history. So we're not quite sure yet what our next episode will be on. We have a few other topics that we're thinking about discussing. So we hope you will give us feedback. Like you said, tell us where you were or what your 9/11 story is in the comments, and maybe I'll put something in our community post also. So we will see you on our next episode, and we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.